The rooftop garden above the Chicago River glowed with string lights and warm laughter, but the wind off Lake Michigan made everything feel sharper. Somewhere below, an L train rattled past. Waiters slid between groups with trays of tiny burgers and champagne that caught the light. Ethan Cole stood near a planter of mums holding a glass of club soda because it gave his hands something to do. The ice clicked when he shifted his grip. People around him wore confidence like it belonged to them. Ethan kept tugging at his cuffs as if his sleeves might betray him. A hardcover pressed against his hip, pocket lightning. He had signed copies all evening, his name looping across the first page until it stopped feeling like his own. Now, he held the book close like a pass that could be revoked. On the back jacket just above the barcode, a pale coffee ring ghosted the paper. Ethan could still see the morning it happened, his mug tipping the brown circle blooming across draft pages. He had dabbed at it with a dish towel. The stain stayed anyway. When the design team offered to remove it, Vivian Sterling had only said, "Leave it." So, the ring remained a small bruise that refused to be airbrushed into perfection. Vivian stood across the terrace, half-turned toward a cluster of editors. In the office, she was all angles and silence, a woman who could end a meeting with one raised eyebrow. Tonight, she wore a midnight blue dress, simple and close, and her hair fell in soft waves that moved when the wind touched it. When she spoke, people leaned in. Ethan caught her gaze and looked away, then looked back, caught again. Vivian's mouth lifted at one corner. It was not the smile she gave cameras. It was smaller, meant for one person. He slid his fingers into his pocket and found the ridged plastic of a tiny keychain flashlight. One button. He rolled it between his thumb and forefinger without turning it on. The object felt silly and comforting, like a lucky coin. Behind him, a bright laugh cut through the adult murmur. "Zoe." She sprinted between cocktail tables, her dress swishing at her knees. A sparkly headband bounced in her hair. She stopped in front of Ethan and looked up, eyes wide with a kind of joy that made him ache. "Dad, she said they have doll burgers. Can I get 3?" "2," Ethan said. Zoe narrowed her eyes like she was negotiating. 2.5. Ethan bent down. "Eat 2. We'll talk." Zoe grinned and shot off again, then paused suddenly, focused on the small stage at the far end of the rooftop. A microphone waited there. A photographer adjusted his lens. Ethan's stomach tightened. Tonight, a banner with the book cover hung behind the stage, huge and definite, as if the story belonged to the world and not to the cramped apartment where it had started. Vivian crossed the terrace toward him and stopped beside him. Their shoulders nearly touched. Ethan caught a clean, faint scent like rain on paper. "You're hiding," Vivian said. "I'm observing," Ethan replied. Vivian glanced at his glass. "Hydrating." "Trying to stay vertical," Ethan said. Vivian's eyes followed Zoe, who was edging closer to the stage. "Your daughter doesn't share that goal." Zoe turned back once as if checking whether Ethan was watching. Then she climbed the steps like she owned them, small hands gripping the rail. "Zoe," Ethan called, not loud enough to be useful. Vivian did not move to stop her. Her expression softened, then flickered like she was startled by her own reaction. She brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "There are cameras," Ethan said. Vivian looked at him. "Let them." "That's easy for you to say." "No," Vivian said quiet and steady. "It isn't." A flash popped, then another. The photographer caught Zoe leaning into the microphone, her chin lifted, her grin fearless. Each burst of light vanished fast, leaving spots in Ethan's vision. He felt the keychain flashlight again, a small weight in his pocket. He pressed his thumb to the button, but did not click it. The book cover rubbed against his side. Ethan breathed in and out slow, like he was editing himself back into control. Zoe tapped on the microphone with one finger. The sound thumped through the speakers. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Ethan took a step forward. Vivian's hand settled lightly on his forearm, not gripping just there, a quiet anchor. Ethan glanced down at her fingers, pale and still. No rings. The music lowered. The terrace hushed. Zoe looked out at the crowd as if she could see every face at once. For a second, the lights in the river and the banner blurred, as if the night had inhaled and held its breath. 6 months earlier in Oak Park, Ethan stood at a kitchen counter with a chipped mug of coffee and a stack of bills. The paper edges were curled from being opened and shut. A final notice lay on top, the red letters loud even in dim light. Ethan's phone sat face down beside the mug. No new messages. That was almost worse today. The radiator clicked and hissed. The street outside was gray, not quite morning, not quite night. An origami crane, folded from Zoe's school worksheet, sat on top of the papers, its uneven wings holding everything in place. Ethan rubbed his eyes, checked the microwave clock, and tried to make numbers behave. Upstairs, the floor creaked with Zoe turning in her sleep. He listened to the quiet and let it settle. The radiator clicked again. Ethan set both hands on the counter and stared at the final notice until the red ink blurred. The origami crane on top of the pile tilted toward him. Zoe had folded it from a spelling worksheet and placed it there like a tiny guard. He checked the microwave clock. 6:30. A knock hit the front door. 3 taps. Even, certain. His coffee mug jerked. A dark splash jumped the rim and landed on the notice. It spread in a soft circle, soaking and turning official letters into something stained and human. Ethan swore under his breath and moved down the hall. He wiped his palm on his sweatpants, then grabbed a sweatshirt from the couch and pulled it on. At the door, he leaned into the peephole. Vivian Sterling stood on his porch. For a moment, his mind rejected it. Vivian belonged to glass walls and conference rooms, not to his chipped railing and winter air. She wore a tailored coat and held a leather folder at her side. Her posture was still as if she had arrived early for a meeting and intended to stay on schedule. His stomach tightened. He saw the interview again in quick flashes. Vivian behind her desk, the clean scent of paper and polish, her eyes moving over his resume as if it were something she could revise. He remembered how his voice had sounded too controlled when he spoke about deadlines and style guides, how he had avoided mentioning the night shifts, the freelance jobs, the way he sometimes edited in the dark, so Zoe would not wake and ask why he looked tired. He needed it. He needed health insurance. He needed the kind of paycheck that meant the next letter in the mail would not decide whether Zoe got to keep her room. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked, Zoe shifting in bed. The sound grounded him. He unlocked the deadbolt. Cold air slid into the entryway. Vivian looked him over once, quick and complete. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Ms. Sterling." His mouth tasted like old coffee. "You left something," Vivian said. "At the office," Ethan asked. "At the building," Vivian corrected. "After your interview." He swallowed. "I can pick it up Monday." "It is Saturday," Vivian said. I noticed Ethan replied, then wished he had not. A faint shift touched her mouth. "May I come in?" The question felt polite. The answer felt decided. Ethan stepped aside. Vivian crossed the threshold without hesitation. Ethan's living room was narrow and full of Zoe's evidence. A backpack by the couch, plastic blocks near the coffee table, a dish on the counter, a rabbit plush on the armchair, one ear bent. Heat climbed Ethan's face. "Sorry, we had a long week." Vivian's gaze moved across the mess and did not stop on it. She noticed the small things instead. The half-colored worksheet on the table, the pencil worn down to a nub, the child-sized coat hooked to the banister. Her expression did not soften, but her eyes did just slightly, as if the room had answered a question she had not asked out loud. "It looks lived in," Vivian said. Ethan started scooping blocks into a basket because his hands needed a job. 2 blocks rolled back out and bumped his shoe. "Do you want coffee?" Ethan asked. Vivian's eyes flicked to the mug on the counter, to the brown circle blooming on the notice. "No." Ethan set the mug down carefully. The coffee ring looked like a bruise. From upstairs came a small voice thick with sleep. "Dad." Ethan froze. "This is frozen." Bare feet padded down the stairs. Zoe appeared at the landing in unicorn pajamas, hair sticking up in a way that made her look struck by lightning. She rubbed her eyes, then stared at Vivian with the focus of a kid who does not believe in polite masks. "Why are you dressed like it is a party?" Zoe asked. "Zoe," Ethan said softly, warning and pleading at once. Vivian's face softened by a fraction. She stayed at the bottom of the stairs. "Hello," Vivian said, voice lower. "You must be Zoe." Zoe hugged her rabbit by the neck. "Are you a teacher?" "No," Vivian said. "I work with books." Zoe nodded like she understood the whole industry. Then she pointed. "Those shoes are shiny." Vivian glanced down. "Thank you." Zoe's eyes narrowed. "Are you my dad's boss?" "Not yet," Ethan said. Got besto mambilisti, but too fast to dirty. Vivian looked at him, then back to Zoe. "I met your father yesterday. He is good at his work." The word "good" landed in Ethan's chest with a strange weight. Zoe stared at Ethan pleased, then turned back. "Then why are you here when it is still sleepy outside?" Vivian held her gaze. "Because your father forgot something important." Zoe turned on Ethan. "Dad." "It was a long day," Ethan said. Zoe came down the last steps and stopped in front of Vivian, close enough to see everything. She tilted her head. "You look sad," Zoe said. Ethan's pulse jumped. Vivian went very still. "I am fine," she said, too quick. Zoe reached into her pajama pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper shape, an origami crane folded from a scrap of homework. She held it out. For your pocket, Zoe said, so you get luck. Ethan forgot to breathe. Vivian stared at the crane. Then she accepted it with care like the paper could tear from a wrong thought. Thank you, Vivian said, voice softer. That is kind. Zoe nodded, satisfied. Now you are less sad. Vivian's eyes flicked to Ethan. Something passed between them, quick and private. Zoe yawned. Can I have pancakes? Soon, Ethan said. Go back upstairs for a minute. Zoe dragged her feet 2 steps up, then called down, do not forget your stuff again. I heard you, Ethan said. Zoe disappeared. The house felt quieter for it. Vivian stood in Ethan's entryway with the paper crane in one hand and the leather folder in the other. She looked past him once, not to judge, but to understand. Her gaze landed on the coffee ring on the notice, then returned to him. You did leave this, Vivian said. She lifted the leather folder between them. Ethan stared at it as if it might bite. He recognized the worn corner where he had once tried to press it flat under a stack of books. He could feel the weight of everything he had put inside it last night. The careful resume, the printed references, the editing sample he had polished after Zoe fell asleep. All the pieces that were supposed to make him look steady. I thought I had it, Ethan said. You did, Vivian replied. Until you did not. The folder smelled faintly of cedar and something clean, as if it had spent most of its life in a room that never had a sink full of dishes. Vivian held it out. Ethan reached for it, then hesitated. His fingers stopped an inch short, like he was waiting to be told whether he deserved to touch it. Vivian did not let go right away. I had Nora call the building, she said, eyes steady on his. Security found it on a chair outside conference room B. Ethan's throat tightened. The chair. He remembered standing up too fast when the interview ended, grateful he had not spilled water on himself, grateful he had not said the wrong thing. He remembered Vivian's hand pale against the dark desk, turning his editing sample as if she could feel its spine. He took the folder. His fingertips were cold. The leather was warmer than it should have been, as if it had been held close for longer than a handoff required. Thank you, Ethan said. The words sounded thin. Vivian nodded once as if the exchange could be done and filed away. But she did not turn toward the door. Instead, she looked past Ethan again toward the kitchen counter, toward the coffee ring spreading slowly across red print. Ethan followed her gaze and felt his embarrassment flare. It is a rough morning, Vivian said. It was not sympathy, it was observation, calm and exact. Ethan tightened his hold on the folder. His heart had started to race and he could not tell why. He had his things back. He could shut the door. He could take Zoe upstairs. He could make pancakes and pretend he had never opened the door to a CEO in sweatpants. He shifted the folder to his left hand. The right one went to the clasp. Vivian's eyes dropped to the motion. Ethan froze with the clasp half open. What he said too sharp. Then softer. Is there a problem? Vivian's face did not change, but something in her gaze did. She had the look of someone stepping carefully around glass. I opened it, she said. Ethan's fingers went numb. Why? To find your contact information, Vivian answered even. You did not list a phone number on your resume? Ethan blinked. He had not. He had been so focused on tightening verbs and aligning margins that he had left out the one thing that mattered. And Vivian added. The word hung there. Ethan's stomach sank. He felt the house tilt slightly like a train starting up. He opened the folder anyway because he had to see what she meant. Paper edges, his printed resume, the editing sample with his notes in blue ink, a small stack of reference letters. Then tucked behind them a second set of pages that did not match the rest. Thinner paper, softer, handled more. The top page had a title in large letters, slightly crooked from being printed on his old printer. Pocket Lightning. Ethan's breath caught. He had forgotten it was in there. He had shoved the draft in at the last second, not to show anyone, just to keep it safe from Zoe's markers and the kitchen table. The manuscript belonged in the drawer beside his bed. It belonged in the quiet. It belonged to nights when Zoe asked questions he could not answer, and he gave her a story instead. Vivian's eyes stayed on Ethan's face, not on the pages. Ethan swallowed. That is not part of the interview. I know, Vivian said. He closed the folder fast, the sound too loud in the small room. It is just something I write. Vivian's gaze flicked to the staircase, then back. Her voice lowered. For Zoe. Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated how quickly she had seen it. He hated that she was right. He held the folder against his chest like a shield. I did not mean for anyone to read it. Vivian's expression remained composed, but her eyes had a brightness to them, like a light had shifted behind glass. I did not read all of it. That makes it better, Ethan said, then regretted the bitterness. He scrubbed a hand across his face. Sorry. I am sorry. I am tired. Vivian nodded, accepting the apology without taking it personally. Ethan tried again. It is private. It is honest, Vivian said. Ethan laughed once, short and humorless. Honest does not pay the mortgage. Vivian's eyes dropped again to the coffee ring on the final notice, then back to him. No. The quiet that followed felt heavy but not cruel. Vivian did not rush to fill it. Ethan heard the radiator ticking, heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, heard his own pulse. From upstairs, Zoe's voice floated down, muffled by distance. Dad, I want chocolate chips. Ethan did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on Vivian as if moving would make the moment snap. Vivian's fingers tightened around the paper crane Zoe had given her. The little wings trembled just slightly with her breath. You wrote about a flashlight, Vivian said. Ethan's chest tightened. He had written that scene last winter after a power outage. Zoe had been afraid of the dark, not because of monsters, but because darkness made her think of empty rooms. In the story, the kid found a tiny light in a coat pocket, not big enough to change the world, just big enough to make the next step. Ethan forced himself to speak. Kids like things they can hold. Vivian's eyes stayed on him, adults too. Ethan could not tell if the comment was meant for him or for her. He only knew it landed somewhere tender. He loosened his grip on the folder. The edges of the manuscript pressed against his ribs through the leather. I am not an author, Ethan said. Vivian's mouth lifted at one corner, faint. Most authors are not at first. Ethan's laugh this time was softer. You say that like it is simple. It is not, Vivian replied. She took a step closer, not into his space, but near enough that Ethan could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. Not many. Enough to remind him she was human. My job is to notice what is on the page, Vivian said, and what is underneath it. Ethan held her gaze. And what did you notice? Vivian looked down at the folder, then up again. Her voice returned to its more formal register, crisp without being cold. 2 opportunities, she said. Ethan's pulse kicked. The senior editor role you interviewed for Vivian continued. We need someone who can manage both craft and deadlines. Someone who can tell the difference between a problem sentence and a problem story. Ethan nodded, careful, like he was afraid to disturb the air. Vivian's eyes flicked toward the staircase again, then back, and the manuscript. Ethan's fingers tightened around the leather edge. No. Vivian did not react. She did not push. She simply waited, letting his refusal sit between them. Ethan exhaled through his nose. I cannot do that. I cannot have someone take it apart. It is for my kid. Vivian's gaze softened just a fraction. I would not take it apart. You would, Ethan said, almost a plea. That is what editors do. Vivian nodded. Yes. Ethan shook his head. It is all I have that is only ours. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Her fingers moved on the paper crane, smoothing a crease Zoe had made. Then she spoke, and her voice had less edge. I am not asking you to publish it today, she said. I am asking you to let me talk to you about it. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to say no again, just to keep control. He wanted to shut the folder and return to a life where the only person who read his words was a sleepy child with syrup on her chin. But Vivian Sterling was standing in his living room, holding a paper crane like it mattered. Vivian Sterling had read his secret pages and had not laughed. He tried to steady his voice. Why do you care? Vivian's eyes did not flinch. Because it is good. Ethan's laugh came out strangled. You cannot know that from 2 pages. Vivian's gaze sharpened. I know a voice when I hear it. The radiator clicked again. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, Zoe began humming something to herself, a tune Ethan did not recognize. Ethan felt suddenly exhausted, as if he had been holding his breath for months. Vivian straightened. The professional mask settled back into place, but the softness did not vanish completely. It stayed in the set of her mouth, in the way she did not look away from the mess, or the bills, or him. Here is what will happen, Vivian said. Ethan's stomach clenched at the certainty in her tone. She continued anyway. You will come in Monday morning. We will finish the hiring decision properly. You will bring the full draft of your manuscript. Ethan started to speak. Vivian lifted one hand not to silence him, but to pause him. The paper crane rested in her palm. You can say no, Vivian said. You can decide it stays in your drawer. That is your right. Ethan's chest tightened. Vivian was giving him control while still asking for trust. And the job, Ethan said, voice rough. You said we will finish the decision properly. Vivian met his eyes. Yes. Ethan tried to read her face for certainty. All he found was intention. Vivian turned toward the door. Ethan followed her, still holding the folder like it was made of glass. At the threshold she stopped and looked back once, taking in the room again. The rabbit plush, the backpack, the coffee ring on the final notice. Ethan's tired face. Then her gaze dropped to the folder. You forgot it, Vivian said more quietly, but you did not lose it. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Vivian stepped onto the porch. Cold air spilled in. Ethan held the door as she walked down the steps. The wind tugged at her coat. Before she reached the sidewalk, Vivian glanced back. Monday, she said. Ethan nodded once because it was all he could manage. Vivian walked away, her shoes making a soft sound on the concrete. Ethan watched until she turned the corner and disappeared. He shut the door. The latch clicked. For a moment, he stood with his forehead against the wood, breathing. Then he looked down at the folder in his hands. Upstairs, Zoe called louder now. "Dad, pancakes." Ethan closed his eyes. "Coming," he called back. He carried the folder to the kitchen counter and set it down beside the stained final notice. The coffee ring looked darker now. Ethan opened the folder again, slower this time, and slid out the manuscript. The paper edges were worn. The title stared up at him. He touched the top page with 2 fingers, gentle, as if he could feel Zoe's small hand in the ink. Then he heard Zoe's footsteps on the stairs, quick and impatient, and he looked up as she came into the room. Zoe came into the kitchen with her rabbit tucked under one arm and her hair still wild. She stopped when she saw the folder on the counter, then the loose pages beside it. "Is that the story?" she asked. Ethan slid the manuscript back into the folder, slow and careful. "It is a draft." Zoe climbed onto a chair and leaned her chin on the table. Did the fancy shoe lady read it? Ethan opened the fridge and stared inside as if an answer might be waiting behind the milk. She read a little. Zoe's eyes widened. Did she like it? "I think so," Ethan said. Zoe smiled in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten. She looked proud, like his words belonged to her too. Then her stomach growled loud enough to fill the quiet. "Pancakes," she reminded him. Ethan exhaled and pulled the mix from the cabinet. He poured it into a bowl, added milk, cracked an egg with one hand, because Zoe liked when he did that. The shell split wrong. A shard fell in. He fished it out with his fingertip. Zoe watched like a judge. "You are stressed." "I am making pancakes," Ethan said. "That is not the same," Zoe replied. Ethan turned on the stove. The burner clicked, caught, and warmed the pan. He poured batter, watching it spread. The smell rose sweet and familiar. It made the kitchen feel less like a place where red letters waited. Zoe slid off the chair and padded to the counter, where the coffee ring stained the final notice. She traced the circle with her finger. "Looks like a donut," she said. "It was an accident," Ethan answered. Zoe nodded, as if that explained everything about adults. Accidents happen. Ethan flipped the pancake. The edge browned. He listened to Zoe humming a tune she invented on the spot. Then he heard another sound, quieter, the radiator clicking like a metronome. After breakfast, Zoe dragged a stool to the sink and insisted on rinsing her plate. Water splashed the counter. Ethan watched her, half amused, half tired. "Zoe," he said, "I have to go out later." "Where?" "To print something." Zoe squinted. "The story." Ethan did not answer right away. He wiped syrup from the table with a paper towel. The folder sat on the counter, heavy and still. The paper crane Vivian had taken was gone, but Ethan could still see it in his mind, folded edges against her pale palm. "Yes," he said finally, "the story." Zoe climbed down and wrapped her arms around his waist, sudden and firm, her cheek pressed into his sweatshirt. "You should," she said into the fabric. "It is good." Ethan's throat tightened. He rested his hand on the back of her head. Her hair smelled like shampoo and sleep. "Go brush your teeth," he said. Zoe pulled away, looked up at him and added, "Tell her the unicorn is important." Ethan laughed once quiet. Noted. On Monday, Ethan woke before Zoe's alarm. The sky outside the window was the color of wet concrete. He dressed in the dark, careful not to wake her, then stopped by her bed anyway. Zoe slept on her side, one hand curled around her rabbit's ear. Ethan stood there for a moment, listening to her breathing. Then he went downstairs and packed her lunch, cutting the apple slices thin because she liked them that way. He tucked a note into the bag with a small drawing of a lightning bolt. He did not sign it. Zoe always knew. At 6:45, he nudged her awake. Zoe blinked at him and sighed like a tiny, dramatic adult. "Is it Monday?" she asked. "It is," Ethan said. Zoe sat up, hair sticking up again. "Do I have to go to school?" "Yes." "Do you have to go to the book place?" Zoe asked, that voice suddenly sharper with interest. Ethan paused. "Yes." Zoe considered that, then slid out of bed. "Okay, but if you get the job, you have to buy better cereal." Ethan smiled. "Deal?" They left the house with the folder tucked under Ethan's arm and Zoe's backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The air outside snapped cold. Salt streaked the sidewalk. Ethan locked the door and checked it twice out of habit, out of fear, out of the way. His mind did not stop making lists. He drove Zoe to school and walked her to the front doors. The hallway smelled like crayons and disinfectant. Zoe waved at a friend and then turned back. "Be brave," she said. Ethan blinked. "You too." Zoe pointed at the folder. "That is your brave." Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd of kids. Then he went back to his car, sat behind the steering wheel, and let his hands rest on the leather for a second before starting the engine. Downtown Chicago rose up around him in glass and steel. The wind off the river cut between buildings. Ethan parked farther away than he wanted because it was cheaper and walked the last blocks with his collar up. His shoes squeaked on patches of leftover snow. He passed a coffee shop with a line curling out the door and smelled roasted beans warm and bitter. He did not stop. He counted minutes. Lakefront House Publishing sat in a tall building where the lobby floor shone like a mirror. Ethan stepped inside and immediately felt underdressed even in his cleanest shirt. The security guard behind the desk glanced at him, then at the folder, then nodded toward a sign in neat letters that said visitors. Ethan gave his name. The guard scanned a list and handed him a badge that still felt too crisp, too official. Elevator to 26, the guard said. Ethan rode up with a group of people who looked like they belonged there. Their coats were expensive. Their hair did not frizz in the winter air. No one spoke. The numbers climbed. Ethan watched his own reflection in the elevator doors and tried to soften his shoulders. The doors opened to a carpeted hallway with framed book covers on the walls. The smell of paper was faint but real, mixed with printer toner and lemon cleaner. A receptionist looked up. "Ethan Cole," she said as if she had practiced. "Nora Pike is expecting you." A woman appeared from behind a glass partition holding a tablet and a coffee cup. She had sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it knew secrets. "You made it," Nora said. "I was curious if you were a myth." Ethan blinked. A myth. Nora lifted her cup slightly. "The Saturday morning guy." Heat touched Ethan's ears. That got around. "Nothing stays quiet here," Nora said. Then her eyes flicked to the leather folder. "Except what we choose." Ethan did not know what to do with that, so he followed her down the hall. Nora moved fast. She pointed out the kitchen, the copy room, the row of offices where editors sat with headphones and exhausted expressions. A stack of galleys leaned against a wall like a small city. Someone argued quietly about a comma. Someone else laughed too loud, then stopped. "This is your desk," Nora said, stopping at a cubicle by a window that looked out at the river. The water below was dark and restless. A tugboat moved through it like a slow thought. Ethan's name was printed on a small sign. The sight hit him harder than he expected. Nora set a badge and a keycard on the desk. "You will get your computer login by lunch. HR will make you watch a video about ethics that will not stop anyone from being unethical." Ethan let out a small laugh. Nora leaned closer and lowered her voice. "The CEO wants you in her office at 9:30. Do not be late." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Okay." Nora glanced at the folder again. "Bring that." Ethan's grip tightened. "You know what it is." Nora's eyebrows lifted. "I know it is heavy. That is enough." Before Ethan could ask more, Nora was already walking away, her heels clicking in a rhythm that sounded like deadlines. HR took him through paperwork, benefits, direct deposit, policies. Ethan signed his name until his hand cramped. Each signature felt like a promise he was afraid to break. He checked his phone twice. No missed calls from school, no messages. He exhaled. At 9:27, Ethan stood outside Vivian Sterling's office with the leather folder tucked under his arm. Her door was closed. The glass wall beside it showed a tidy room with a desk so clean it looked untouched. A single-frame photo sat on a shelf turned face down. Ethan knocked. "Come in," Vivian said. He stepped inside. Vivian sat behind her desk, not pacing, not performing, just watching him with those calm eyes. She wore a black blazer and a white blouse that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. A pencil lay beside a stack of paper, not a pen, a pencil ready to revise. "You are on time," she said. "I did not want to give you a reason," Ethan answered, then regretted how defensive it sounded. Vivian's mouth moved almost a smile. "A reason for what?" Ethan set the folder on the edge of her desk. "To change your mind." Vivian's gaze held his. "My mind was not made up by your punctuality." Ethan's pulse steadied a fraction. He shifted his weight, feeling the carpet under his shoes thick and quiet. Vivian opened the folder with a smooth motion like she had done it 1,000 times and slid out the manuscript. She did not flip pages yet. She just rested her hand on the first sheet. "I spoke with HR," Vivian said. "Your hiring paperwork is moving forward." Ethan's breath caught. He forced himself not to react too much as if joy could jinx the moment. Vivian continued, eyes on him. "Your role is senior editor. You will have a list of titles. You will have deadlines. You will have a team." Ethan nodded. "Yes." Vivian tapped the top page of Pocket Lightning once. "And this." Ethan's throat tightened. "This is not a requirement for the job." "No," Vivian said. "It is not." He waited, watching her fingers. He noticed a faint crease in her sleeve, a small imperfection. It made him feel less like he was standing on a stage. Vivian finally opened the manuscript and turned to a page marked with a sticky note. Her pencil lifted. "I read the full draft," Vivian said. Ethan's mouth went dry. "All of it. All of it," Vivian repeated. He tried to keep his voice steady, and Vivian looked down at the page. She made a small mark in the margin, then another. The pencil scratched softly, intimate as whispering. "And I have notes," she said. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "Of course you do." Vivian looked up, and for a moment the corporate mask slipped not into warmth, but into something intent and almost personal. "I do not do this for everyone," she said. Ethan held her gaze. "Why are you doing it for me?" Vivian's eyes stayed on him, calm but bright. She did not answer the question. Instead, she turned the manuscript toward him, slightly inviting him to look. "Sit," Vivian said. Ethan sat in the chair across from her desk. The leather creaked under him. Vivian pointed to a paragraph with the pencil. "Here, your child character finds the flashlight and thinks it is a secret. That is good. But you rush past the feeling. Let the kid linger. Let the light do what it does." Ethan stared at the page. His words looked different on her desk under her hand. More fragile, more real. Vivian flipped to another section. This scene with the unicorn. "Zoe was right. It matters." Ethan's mouth twitched. "Zoe told you." Vivian's eyes lifted. Children are not subtle. Ethan laughed at once quiet, then stopped, because Vivian's expression had changed. Not sad, not soft, just focused, as if she was holding something steady inside herself. Vivian set the pencil down. "We will work on this," she said, "properly." Ethan's pulse beat in his throat. "When?" Vivian looked at the clock on the wall, then back at him. "After you finish your onboarding tasks today, come back at 4. Bring your laptop. Bring your willingness to be edited." Ethan swallowed. "Yes." Vivian nodded once, satisfied. Then she stood, signaling the meeting was over. Ethan stood too, automatically. As he reached for the manuscript, Vivian's hand stayed on it a second longer than necessary. Her fingers were steady, her eyes were not. Ethan slid the pages back into the folder and held it close as he walked out. The hallway outside felt louder now. Phones rang, printers hummed, someone laughed again. Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket, and he flinched, then pulled it out. A message from Zoe's teacher. Ethan stared at the screen, heart tightening, and turned toward the elevators with the folder tucked under his arm like a shield. Ethan stared at the message until the words stopped being letters and became a weight. "Ms. Harper, call me when you can. It is about Zoe." His thumb hovered over the screen. He could hear the office around him, phone's footsteps, a laugh that ended too fast. The leather folder pressed against his ribs. He called, "Mr. Cole." Ms. Harper said, her voice careful in a way that made his stomach tighten. "Hi, thank you for calling back." "What happened?" Ethan asked. He kept his voice low as if volume might make it worse. "Zoe is safe," Ms. Harper said quickly. "She is in the main office with Mrs. Delgado." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. "Okay." "There was a conflict on the playground," Ms. Harper continued. "Another child said something unkind. Zoe responded by pushing him, hard." Ethan exhaled slow. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," Ms. Harper said. "The other child cried, but he is fine. Zoe was upset. She told me she was protecting someone." Ethan looked down the hall toward the elevators. The badge on his chest felt too new to be real. "I can come now." "That would be best," Ms. Harper said. "And we can talk about what happened." "Okay," Ethan repeated. He ended the call, then stood still for a moment, trying to split himself into two people. The new senior editor who belonged here, and the father who belonged everywhere Zoe was. He turned back toward Vivian's office. The glass wall showed her standing at her desk, flipping through pages of his manuscript with her pencil in hand, calm as a metronome. Ethan hesitated outside the door, then knocked once. "Come in," Vivian said without looking up. Ethan stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of paper, and something cool like winter air trapped indoors. "I need to go," he said. Vivian's pencil paused. She lifted her eyes. "Now, my daughter's school," Ethan said. He hated how his voice tightened on the word daughter, as if the room might judge it. "She got into trouble. I have to pick her up." Vivian's expression did not harden. It shifted into focus. "Is she hurt?" Vivian asked. "No," Ethan said. "But I should be there." Vivian nodded once like it was not a disruption, but a fact. "Go." Ethan blinked. He had expected questions. A lecture about professionalism. A reminder that he was new. Vivian's eyes held his. "Text Nora. She can handle the logistics." Ethan swallowed. "I am sorry." Vivian's gaze dropped to the manuscript on her desk, then back to him. Do not apologize for being a father. The words hit him harder than they should have. He managed a nod and turned toward the door. As he left, Vivian's pencil tapped the paper once, a small sound like a punctuation mark. Outside, Nora was at his desk speaking into her headset. She lifted a finger at him, then ended the call. Let me guess, Nora said. School. Ethan's chin shoulders sagged. How did you know? Nora glanced at his face. You have the look of a man whose brain just turned into a checklist. Go. I will tell HR you stepped out. If anyone asks, you are saving the future of Chicago. Ethan let out a breath that almost counted as a laugh. Thank you. Nora waved him off. Bring your bag back, or do not. Just do not forget the kid. Ethan moved fast. The elevator felt too slow. He watched the numbers drop and pressed his fingers into the folder, like it could keep him upright. Outside, the wind cut between buildings. Snow flurried sideways, thin and sharp, like the city was sandblasting itself clean. Ethan pulled his collar up and hurried to his car. The school office smelled like carpet cleaner and crayons. Zoe sat in a plastic chair with her rabbit in her lap, feet swinging. Her face was set in a stubborn line, but her eyes flicked up the moment Ethan entered, quick and bright with relief. Mrs. Delgado stood beside the desk, arms crossed. Mr. Cole. Ethan forced his breathing to slow. Hi. I am sorry. Zoe slid off the chair. She moved toward him, then stopped herself at the last second, as if she was not sure she was allowed to want comfort. Ethan knelt anyway and put a hand on her shoulder. Tell me what happened, he said softly. Zoe stared at the floor. He called Maya stupid. Mrs. Delgado spoke before Zoe could continue. Zoe pushed him. She pushed him hard enough that he fell. We do not solve problems with our hands. Zoe's jaw tightened. He was being mean. Ethan looked at her. Was Maya okay? Zoe nodded fast. Maya was fine. She was sad. So I fixed it. By pushing, Ethan said. Zoe's eyes flashed. He deserved it. Ethan held her gaze, then lowered his voice. You cannot decide what someone deserves with your hands. Zoe's shoulders rose, then dropped. Her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with the effort of holding them back. He was loud, she whispered. He made her face do that thing. Ethan knew what she meant. That pinched expression kids got when they were trying not to cry in public. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He stood and spoke to Mrs. Delgado, and Ms. Harper signed a form promised a conversation at home. The adults talked around him, but his attention stayed on Zoe on the way she held her rabbit too tight. In the car, Zoe sat silent for 2 full blocks. Snow tapped the windshield. The wipers squeaked. Ethan kept his hands steady on the steering wheel. I am proud that you care about your friend, he said. Zoe did not look at him, but Ethan agreed. We find other ways. Zoe's voice came out small. He would not stop. Ethan thought of Vivian's pencil, the way it marked a sentence instead of tearing the page. Then you get help, he said. You tell a grown-up. You use your words. You walk away. Zoe made a face. Words are slow. They can be, Ethan said, but they last longer. Zoe picked at the seam of her rabbit's ear. Are you in trouble at work because of me? The question landed like a stone. Ethan glanced at her. No. Zoe did not believe him. He could tell by the way she stared out the window. Ethan chose his next words carefully. My work is books. Books are full of kids who do hard things, and adults who try to do better. My work can wait. You cannot. Zoe's throat bobbed. She nodded once quick, like she was tucking the feeling away. Back at home, Ethan made grilled cheese because it was warm and easy, and it made the kitchen smell like safety. Zoe sat at the table and drew lightning bolts on a scrap of paper. Ethan watched her, then glanced at the leather folder on the counter. By mid-afternoon, the sky had gone darker. Snow thickened outside the window, turning the street into a muted tunnel of white. Ethan called the neighbor he trusted, a retired nurse named Mrs. Klein, and asked if Zoe could sit with her for a few hours. Mrs. Klein said yes without hesitation. Zoe trotted next door with her rabbit and her drawing paper, then turned back in the hallway. Are you going to the book place again? She asked. Yes, Ethan said. Zoe studied his face. Okay, tell the fancy shoe lady I said hi. Ethan hesitated. Her name is Vivian. Zoe nodded, as if she already knew that. Tell Vivian hi. Ethan drove downtown again, the road slow under fresh snow. The city looked different at 4 o'clock lights coming on early, the river dark and restless. He walked into the lobby, shaking snow off his coat, and rode up to 26 with his laptop bag and the folder. Nora spotted him the moment he stepped out. She, okay, Nora asked, voice casual, eyes sharp. She is, Ethan said. Thank you. Nora nodded, then handed him a visitor sticker anyway, even though he had a badge. Put this on, she said. It keeps people from asking questions. Also, you look like you might bite someone if they do. Ethan managed a tired smile and headed toward Vivian's office. Vivian was waiting. Her desk lamp cast a small circle of light that made the rest of the room feel dimmer by contrast. She glanced up when he entered. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Ethan replied. Vivian's gaze held his for a beat. Then she gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Ethan sat. He pulled out his laptop and the manuscript. Vivian's pencil was already in her hand. They worked. Vivian moved through his pages with a kind of precision that felt almost gentle. She did not crush sentences. She nudged them. She asked questions that forced him to see what he had skipped. "Why does the child hide the flashlight?" Vivian asked. "Because he thinks it is his," Ethan said. "And why does he think he needs something that is only his?" Vivian asked. Ethan's mouth went dry. He stared at the paragraph. He heard Zoe's voice in the car asking if Ethan was in trouble because of her. "Because he is afraid," Ethan said quietly. "Afraid if he shares it, it will be taken." Vivian did not look up. She made a small mark in the margin, then let the page feel that. Snow pushed against the windows. The building creaked softly in the wind. At some point, the overhead lights flickered once returned, then flickered again. Vivian looked up at the ceiling, then back to the page as if she refused to be distracted. The lights went out. For half a second, the office was pure dark. Then emergency lights clicked on, casting the hallway in a low red glow that made everything look like an old photograph. Somewhere down the corridor, someone cursed. A phone rang and then died. Ethan's laptop screen stayed lit, a small rectangle of blue-white in the dimness. Vivian set her pencil down. She did not move. Her face was composed, but her shoulders had gone tight, almost imperceptibly. "We can stop," Vivian said. Ethan glanced at the window. Snow whirled outside like static. "We do not have to." Vivian's eyes shifted to him. "Do you have somewhere else to be?" Ethan thought of Zoe next door, safe with Mrs. Klein, and a grilled cheese and a stack of paper. "No," he said. "Do you?" Vivian's gaze held his for a moment longer than necessary. Then she reached for the manuscript again, as if choosing motion over stillness. Ethan's laptop dimmed as the battery saver kicked in. The light on the page became uneven, forcing his eyes to strain. He slid a hand into his pocket, then paused. He did not want to look childish. He did it anyway. He pulled out the small keychain flashlight. It was cheap plastic ridged on the sides with a single button, the kind of thing people tossed into tote bags at conferences and forgot. Ethan clicked it on. A narrow beam cut through the red gloom and landed on the manuscript bright and steady. It made the pencil marks look sharper. It made the words feel closer. Vivian's eyes fixed on the light. Ethan held the beam still, then adjusted it slightly so it did not glare. The circle of illumination looked like a pocket-sized moon. Vivian inhaled slow. Her fingers resting on the paper tightened once, then eased. "That is useful," Vivian said, voice. "It lives in my pocket," Ethan replied before he could stop himself. Vivian's gaze lifted to his face. Something moved there, quick and quiet. Not a smile, not sadness. Recognition maybe, and the effort of holding it back. Ethan kept the beam on the page. "You gave it to me," he said. "I did not," Vivian replied. "Then after a pause I placed it where you would find it." Ethan's throat tightened. He said nothing. He let the light speak instead, steady on the paragraph. Vivian picked up her pencil again. The graphite scratched softly, a small sound that felt intimate in the dark. "Here," she said, pointing. "Let the child breathe before he runs." Ethan nodded. He moved the light. Vivian wrote. Their hands did not touch, but the space between them felt charged anyway, like the air before a storm. In the hallway, the red emergency lights hummed. Outside the window, snow kept falling thick and soundless. Vivian's gaze drifted for a second to the shelf where the framed photo sat face down. Then she brought her eyes back to the page and continued marking, as if she had decided the paper in front of her was safer than the memory behind her. Ethan kept holding the flashlight. The beam did not shake. His hand did, only a little. Vivian kept her eyes on the page as if the light were ordinary, as if a cheap plastic flashlight in a CEO's office was a normal tool of the trade. Her pencil moved in small, exact strokes. Graphite whispered. The emergency lights in the hall threw a dull red through the glass wall, turning the office into a quiet box of shadow and paper. Ethan adjusted the angle again. The circle of light slid across the paragraph and settled on the next sentence. He could feel the heat of the LED against his thumb. Vivian cleared her throat once. "You cut away from the child too fast," she said. "You do it when you get close to the truth." Ethan's mouth went dry. "That is not an editing note." "It is," Vivian replied, calm. "Because it is on the page." Ethan stared at the words. The kid in his story clutched the flashlight like it could keep a whole room from disappearing. Ethan had written that scene at 2 in the morning, Zoe asleep upstairs, the silence heavy enough to hear the refrigerator breathe. He had thought he was writing for a child. He had not admitted he was writing for himself. Vivian tapped the margin with the eraser end of her pencil. Here, she said. Let him feel scared. Let him name it. You do not need to fix it in the same paragraph. Ethan swallowed. Kids do not want to sit in fear. Vivian finally looked up. Her eyes caught the beam of light, caught Ethan's face, and held. Kids can handle fear, she said. They cannot handle pretending it does not exist. Ethan shifted in his chair. The leather creaked softly. He moved the light again, kept his voice low. And adults. Vivian's expression changed by a fraction. It was not a smile. It was something like recognition, quick and gone. A muffled announcement crackled over the building's intercom. The words were distorted, but the meaning came through. Power outage, please remain calm. Elevators temporarily unavailable. Use stairs if needed. Down the hall, someone laughed, nervous and bright, then stopped. A door opened. Footsteps hurried. The whole floor felt suddenly less private. Vivian set her pencil down. We should pause, she said. Ethan glanced at his laptop. The battery icon glowed yellow. The screen dimmed again. I can keep going, he said, though his wrist ached from holding the flashlight. Vivian's gaze moved to his hand. You have been holding that the entire time. It is fine, Ethan said. His fingers cramped around the ridged plastic. Vivian stood smooth and quiet, and crossed to a cabinet behind her desk. She opened it and pulled out a small notebook and a soft leather case. She did not offer a joke. She did not comment on the absurdity. She simply returned to the desk and slipped the notebook into her bag. I will have facilities send a status update, she said. For now, the building will probably clear the floor. Ethan nodded. He clicked off the flashlight and the sudden darkness made him blink. The red emergency glow seeped into the room again. He slid the flashlight into his pocket and flexed his hand, trying to wake feeling back into his fingers. Vivian looked at the manuscript. Her palm rested on the top page flat as if she were steadying it. Your voice is strong, she said, quieter. It gets stronger when you let it be messy. Ethan almost laughed. He thought of the coffee ring on his final notice. Messy is easy, he said. Vivian's eyes met his. No, she replied. Messy is honest. Honest is harder. Ethan felt that land in his chest. Another announcement crackled, this time clearer. Please proceed to the stairwells. Building staff will assist. Vivian picked up her pencil and tucked it behind her notebook. She moved with practiced control, but Ethan noticed something in her shoulders, a faint stiffness that had not been there earlier. Do you want me to carry something? Ethan asked and immediately regretted it. It sounded too personal. Vivian's voice stayed even. No. He stood and slid the manuscript back into the leather folder. The edges of the pages caught, then settled. He snapped the clasp closed and slung his laptop bag onto his shoulder. Vivian reached the door first and opened it. Red light washed the hallway. The air smelled like dust warmed by emergency systems. They stepped out into the corridor with other employees, faces lit in low, crimson phones held up like tiny lanterns. Ethan spotted Nora near the stairwell, her hair pulled back, tablet in hand, looking like she could manage a fire with a calendar invite. Nora's eyes flicked to Ethan, then to Vivian. We are sending everyone down, she said. No elevators. It is a very romantic day for stairs. Vivian did not react to the joke. Nora adjusted her tone instantly. Still light, but sharper. Security is stationed at each landing. Your cars are fine. Ethan checked his phone. A message from Mrs. Klein blinked on his screen. Zoe is fine. She ate 2 cookies. She keeps asking when you are coming. Relief loosened his ribs. He typed back with his thumb. On my way soon. Thank you. Vivian watched him just for a second, then looked away as if she had seen more than the screen. Nora leaned closer to Ethan, voice low. If you need to go, she said, go. Ethan nodded. I will. Vivian turned toward the stairwell. Ethan stepped in beside her, and the crowd shifted around them, making space without being asked. People did that around Vivian, even in dim red light. The stairwell door was heavy. Vivian pushed it open. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of concrete and wet wool. The stairwell lights were on, pale and humming, but not bright enough to erase shadows. They started down. Vivian's heels clicked on each step, crisp, controlled. Ethan kept his pace a half step behind her. He did not want to crowd her. He did not want to lose her either. At the second landing, the lights flickered. A few people gasped. Someone's phone flashlight snapped on, then another. Ethan slid his hand into his pocket and took out the keychain flashlight. He clicked it on and angled it toward the steps ahead, a steady white slice against gray. Vivian glanced back brief. Thank you, she said. The The words were simple. The way she said them was not. They continued down. The stairwell echoed with footsteps and low voices. Somewhere far below, a door slammed. Ethan kept the beam on the stairs and watched Vivian's shoulders. She held herself like someone who refused to wobble. In the lobby, the building felt half asleep. Security guards stood near the doors. The revolving entrance spun slowly, pushed by the wind. Outside, snow fell in thick straight lines lit by street lamps into bright threads. Ethan's breath fogged as he stepped out with the crowd. The air hit like a slap, clean and bitter. People scattered toward the garage and the sidewalks. Vivian headed toward the parking structure across the street. Ethan fell into step beside her without thinking. Vivian did not tell him to stop. The garage door was open, held by a staff member with a flashlight. Inside, the concrete smelled damp and metallic. Water dripped somewhere. Car alarms chirped faintly as people unlocked doors in the cold. Their footsteps echoed. Vivian's heels sounded softer here, swallowed by the cavern. Ethan's boots scuffed salt on the floor. He clicked off his flashlight. The garage lights were on, dim but steady. For a few seconds they walked in silence, the kind that held unspoken things. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He glanced down. It was a voice message from Zoe, probably recorded on Mrs. Klein's phone. He hesitated, then hit play without thinking. Zoe's voice filled the air too loud in the garage. "Dad, I am not in trouble anymore. Mrs. Klein says you are working on the story. Tell Vivian she can come to Pancakes if she wants. Bye." Ethan's face heated. He fumbled to stop the message too late. The last word echoed off concrete. Vivian stopped walking. Ethan stopped with her. He stared at his phone like it had betrayed him. "I am sorry," he said. Vivian did not look at him right away. Her gaze stayed forward, fixed on a row of parked cars. Her breathing changed almost imperceptibly. One inhale that caught, one exhale that was too controlled. Ethan waited. Vivian's hand lifted toward her coat pocket. Her fingers touched something inside, then withdrew. She swallowed once. "I had a daughter," she said. The sentence came out clean, too clean, like it had been edited down to the minimum. Ethan's throat tightened. He did not speak. Vivian kept her eyes forward. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed softly. A car door slammed somewhere, and the sound jumped. "She was 7, Vivian continued. "Her name was Lena." Ethan felt the world narrow, as if the garage had pulled in close around them. Vivian's jaw tightened. "Leukemia," she said, and the word landed heavy concrete on concrete. Ethan's hands went cold. He did not know where to put them. He kept them at his sides, open, careful. "I'm sorry," he said, and hated how small it sounded. Vivian's mouth moved not into a smile, but into something that might have been an attempt at one. People say that she replied, "It is fine." It was not fine. Ethan could hear it in the way she held each syllable. Vivian took a step forward, then stopped again, like motion had become complicated. During treatments, she said she hated the ceiling lights. She said they were too bright and too sad at the same time. Vivian's voice stayed steady, but her shoulders were rigid. "So, I bought a flashlight at the hospital gift shop. One of those small ones. Plastic. Terrible quality." Ethan felt his fingers curl around the strap of his laptop bag. He stayed silent. He did not want to break her rhythm. She would press the button and say the lightning was in her pocket, Vivian said. Pocket lightning. She made it sound like a secret she was letting me in on. Ethan's breath caught. The title of his manuscript suddenly felt less like his. Vivian finally looked at him. Her eyes were bright, but the tears did not fall. She held them back with sheer will. "When I read your draft, Vivian said I saw her again." "Not exactly, but close enough that I had to sit down." Ethan's voice came out rough. "That is why you stayed." Vivian blinked once slow. "I came because you forgot your folder," she said. "I could have mailed it. I know that." Her gaze dropped for a moment as if she could see her own shoes on Ethan's porch, the salt on the steps, the paper crane in her hand. "I stayed," Vivian said quieter, "because I found something I thought was gone." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He did not reach for her. He wanted to. He did not. He held the space instead, steady as he could. "What was she like?" he asked. The question changed something. Vivian's shoulders loosened a fraction, as if the weight had shifted. Vivian's mouth trembled, almost invisible. "Stubborn," she said. "Funny. She would bargain with nurses for extra pudding cups. She would pretend she was asleep when the doctor came in, so she did not have to answer questions." Ethan nodded. He could see it. A child using humor like armor. "She made paper cranes." Vivian added, her voice softer. "For everyone." She said they were tiny machines that carried wishes. Vivian's fingers brushed her coat pocket again. "She used to put them in my coat so I would find them at work." Ethan remembered Zoe holding out the origami crane this morning. The way Vivian had taken it like it mattered. Vivian's gaze flicked away toward the far wall of the garage where a strip of snow had blown in, melting into a dark line. When she died, Vivian said everything in my life be clean, efficient, quiet. Ethan swallowed, because quiet hurts less. Vivian looked at him, surprised by the accuracy, then recovered. Quiet is manageable, she said. Ethan shifted his weight. The garage was cold enough that his fingertips went numb. He wanted to offer Vivian his scarf. He wanted to do something. Instead, he took out his keychain flashlight and held it up, not turning it on. This is the kind you mean, he said. Vivian's eyes fixed on it. Her lips parted slightly. For a second, she looked like she might reach for it, then she stopped herself. That is very similar, she said. Ethan nodded. It showed up at my desk today. Vivian's gaze moved to his face. A small pause. Then she looked away as if admitting anything more would cost too much. A car engine started nearby. Exhaust curled in the air, ghost white. The sound filled the space between them, giving them both somewhere to rest their eyes. Vivian inhaled and straightened. The mask returned, not cruel, just protective. You should get home, she said. Ethan nodded. Zoe is waiting. Vivian's eyes softened at the name. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a paper crane. Zoe's crane edges slightly crushed from being carried. Vivian held it between two fingers. She gave me this, Vivian said. I saw, Ethan replied. Vivian looked at the crane, then slid it back into her pocket. Thank you for listening, she said very quietly. Ethan's throat tightened again. He forced his voice steady. Anytime. Vivian's eyes held his for a beat. Then she turned toward her car. She walked with the same controlled steps, but Ethan noticed the smallest change. Her shoulders were not as locked as before. Ethan watched her unlock the door, slide inside, and sit for a moment without starting the engine. Then the headlights came on, cutting through the garage gloom. Vivian backed out and drove toward the exit, her taillights fading into the snowy dark. Ethan stood still until she was gone. Then he let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned and walked to his own car. His hands shook as he unlocked it, not from cold, not entirely. He drove through the city with the heater blasting. Snow whipped past the windshield. The radio was silent. His mind kept returning to a little girl pressing a flashlight button in a hospital room, calling it lightning, insisting on wonder where there should have been none. At Oak Park, Ethan parked and hurried inside. Mrs. Klein answered her door in slippers and a cardigan, Zoe's rabbit tucked under her arm like a baton. She was an angel, Mrs. Klein said, smiling, except for the cookie negotiations. Zoe ran out behind her, cheeks flushed, hair damp from a bath. She launched herself at Ethan, arms tight around his waist. You are late, she accused into his coat. Ethan kissed the top of her head. I know. Zoe pulled back and looked up. Did you tell Vivian about pancakes? Ethan swallowed a laugh. Not exactly. Zoe frowned, then decided it was fine. Okay, next time. Ethan carried her inside, thanked Mrs. Klein, and closed the door behind them. The house was warm. The radiator clicked like it had been waiting. On the kitchen counter, the final notice still lay beneath the coffee ring. The stain dried into the paper. Ethan set his laptop bag down and pulled the keychain flashlight from his pocket. He placed it beside the folder like a small tool with a bigger meaning than it should have. Zoe climbed onto a chair and started drawing again, lightning bolts across a fresh page. Ethan opened the leather folder and slid out his manuscript. He stared at the title, Pocket Lightning. His fingers rested on the paper, and for the first time he did not feel like he was holding a secret alone. Ethan woke before the alarm the way he did when his mind refused to unclench. The kitchen was dim. The leather folder sat on the counter with Pocket Lightning inside. The tiny keychain flashlight rested beside it. A coffee ring stained the final notice under the papers, dry now, like the day had branded itself. He made coffee and kept both hands on the mug. Zoe slept upstairs. The radiator clicked. Ethan watched the steam rise and tried to breathe slow. Downtown, the lobby of Lakefront House looked polished enough to reflect his tired face. He rode the elevator up with strangers who did not look at him until they did. He felt eyes slide to the folder and slide away again. Nora met him near his desk. She handed him a stack of galleys and spoke like she was updating a weather report. The board met late, she said. Graham Weller has questions. Stay professional, keep your head down, and do not let anyone drag you into their story. Ethan swallowed. Are people talking? Nora's mouth twitched. People always talk. Today they think they have a reason. Across the floor, Vivian stood behind glass phone to her ear, posture steady. She looked up, once met Ethan's gaze for a heartbeat, then returned to her call. Ethan sat and worked. He edited until the words stopped sounding like language and became shapes. It helped for a while. At noon, Nora appeared again. Conference room D, she said, now. Graham Weller was already there, tablet in hand, smile practiced. Vivian stood by the window, hands at her sides, gaze on the river. Mr. Cole, Graham said, welcome aboard. Thank you, Ethan answered. Graham's eyes dropped to the leather folder. I am told you brought something interesting into the building. Ethan kept his voice flat. I brought my work. Vivian turned from the window. Her expression was calm, but her jaw looked tight. He is here to do his job, she said. Graham lifted a brow. No one is questioning his competence. We are discussing optics. This company runs on trust. Trust depends on clear boundaries. Ethan felt heat rise in his neck. Vivian's office door had been open to him for one afternoon, and now the room made it sound like a scandal. Graham tapped his tablet. We have policies for conflicts and appearances. A new hire receiving direct mentorship from the CEO invites assumptions. Assumptions invite noise. Noise costs money. Vivian's voice stayed even. He did not receive special treatment. He earned his role. Graham smiled as if indulging her. I am sure he did. Still, we should not feed stories. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, then stopped. Anything he said would sound defensive. Anything defensive would sound guilty. Vivian looked at Ethan once. The glance carried an apology and an instruction at the same time. We will keep it professional, Vivian said. Graham leaned forward slightly, meaning. Vivian took a breath. Any discussion of Mr. Cole's manuscript will go through standard channels. Acquisitions. Legal. I will step back from direct editorial involvement. Ethan's chest tightened. He nodded once because he could not trust his voice. Graham's smile warmed. Excellent. That is the clarity we need. He stood, shook Ethan's hand, and left the room, like he had straightened a picture frame. When the door closed, the air went thin. Vivian stayed near the window. Ethan remained seated, staring at the water pitcher, the untouched glasses. I am sorry, Vivian said quietly. Ethan looked up. For what? For letting this touch you, she said. For making it harder to breathe in here. Ethan's hands were flat on the table. I do not want to be a problem. Vivian's gaze sharpened. You are not. The certainty in her voice hurt more than doubt. Vivian glanced at the door. The mask returned smooth and necessary. I need you employed, she said. So, we do this the safe way. Ethan stood. Then we stop, he said, lifting the folder slightly. The notes, the meetings, all of it. Vivian's face did not change, but her eyes went still. That is your choice, she replied. Ethan waited for her to argue. She did not. She only nodded once, controlled, like she was accepting a cut she did not agree with. Ethan walked out and worked until the afternoon blurred. Back at his desk, he opened a galley but could not focus. The office smelled of toner and coffee. Every laugh sounded sharp. He felt folder in his bag like a bruise. He did not open it. At 3:15, his phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, Arizona area code. His stomach sank before he answered. Ethan, a woman said. It is Tessa. He left his desk and pushed into the stairwell. Concrete walls, fluorescent hum, air that smelled like dust. Tessa, he said, the name rough in his mouth. I found your number through the school directory, she said quickly, before you ask. Ethan leaned against the railing. What do you want? A pause, then a careful inhale. I want to see Zoe. Anger rose fast, sharp as winter air. You left. I know, Tessa said. Her voice sounded steadier than he felt. I am not calling to argue about the past. I am calling because I am coming to Chicago next month. I want to meet her. In person. Ethan closed his eyes. He pictured Zoe at the kitchen table drawing lightning bolts. He pictured the origami crane on the counter. He pictured Vivian's face in the garage lit by dim fluorescent holding back tears. You do not get to show up like this, he said. I am trying to do it right, Tessa replied. I have a life here. I have a job. I am stable. Ethan laughed once without humor. Stability is not the same as being present. Tessa went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice softened. Does she ask about me? Ethan stared down the stairs. Not much anymore, he said. The truth sat heavy in his throat. Tessa whispered, I think about her every day. Thinking is easy, Ethan replied. Parenting is the part you did not do. Tessa inhaled, then pushed forward. I am getting married. His name is Mark. He knows about Zoe. He wants to meet her. Ethan's grip tightened on the railing. No, he said. Ethan, Tessa snapped. I am calling you first. I am trying. Ethan swallowed. His voice lowered. You do not call her without me. You do not show up at her school. If you meet her, it is in public, with me there. A long silence. Then fine, Tessa said, clipped. And you do not promise her anything you cannot keep, Ethan added. Tessa's voice softened again. I can keep it now. Ethan did not answer. He ended the call and stood in the stairwell until his breathing slowed. That evening, Zoe sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread out. Ethan stirred pasta on the stove. The final notice lay under the coffee ring, stubborn and quiet. Zoe glanced at him. Your forehead is doing the thing. Ethan set the spoon down and sat across from her. Your mom called, he said. Zoe's pencil stopped. Her face went blank, then too calm. Okay. She wants to see you, Ethan said. Ba mi pis can be decent. Zoe stared at the paper. Did she forget again? No, Ethan said, then corrected himself. She left. She says she wants to meet. Zoe folded the corner of her worksheet slow and precise. Fold, press, turn, fold, again. Ethan watched her hands build something out of control. When she finished, she held up a small paper crane. The wings were uneven, but it stood. Zoe walked to the counter and placed the crane beside the leather folder and the keychain flashlight. She returned to her chair without looking at Ethan. After Zoe fell asleep, Ethan opened the folder and stared at the first page of his manuscript. Vivian's pencil marks were still there, small wounds and small cures. He closed it again and left it on the counter next to the crane. The next day at work, Ethan kept his distance. He sent edits by email. He avoided Vivian's office. When he passed her in the hallway, they exchanged a polite nod that felt like a door closing softly. On Thursday, wind whipped off the river and cut through his coat as he stepped outside the building. He walked a block, stopped under an awning, and held the leather folder in both hands. His phone buzzed. A text from Nora. Room 19, 10 minutes. Ethan tucked the phone away and turned back toward the lobby. The revolving door pushed cold air in with every turn. Outside, the river wind lifted snow, grit off the sidewalk, and tossed it against the glass. Inside, the marble floor shone like it never got tired. Ethan walked across it with the leather folder held tight against his side, as if he could keep his chest from cracking open by squeezing hard enough. He rode the elevator up alone. The numbers blinked. His reflection looked older than it had a week ago. On the 19th floor, the hallway lights were softer, the carpet thicker. This part of the building always felt like it belonged to people who made decisions about other people's lives. Ethan followed the small black signs until he found room 19. Nora stood outside the door with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a key card in the other. She looked up when he approached. You got my message, she said. Ethan nodded. What is this? A room, Nora replied. A quiet one. No board members, no lawyers, no random assistants who accidentally hear something and make it the day's entertainment. Ethan stared at the door. Is Vivian in there? Nora's eyes softened just enough to be human. Yes. Ethan's throat tightened. She is not supposed to be meeting with me. She is not supposed to be doing a lot of things, Nora said. She does them anyway, when they matter. Ethan let out a slow breath. I do not want her getting hit because of me. Nora lifted a brow. You think she has gotten to where she is by avoiding hits? Ethan did not answer. The folder's leather edge pressed into his palm. Nora stepped closer. Her voice dropped. You have two choices. You can keep walking away and let a room full of men decide what your story is worth. Or you can walk in and decide it yourself. Ethan's jaw tightened. He nodded once. Nora swiped the card. The lock clicked. She pushed the door open, then stopped and looked at him as if checking whether he was still breathing. Do not apologize for existing, she said, and then she stepped aside. The room was small, windowless, with a round table and 4 chairs. A cheap air freshener tried to smell like lemons and failed. On the table sat a stack of papers, a pen, and a thin folder, with the Lakefront House logo stamped in silver. Vivian stood near the far wall, coat still on hands clasped in front of her. Her face was calm, her eyes were not. Nora closed the door behind Ethan and leaned her back against it like a guard. Vivian spoke first. Thank you for coming. Ethan set his leather folder on the table, careful. Nora said it was important. It is, Vivian replied. Nora nodded toward the papers and then toward Vivian. I will be here, she said, but I will not be loud. Ethan looked at Vivian. If the board finds out. Vivian lifted her chin. They will not. They have a meeting downstairs and they think they have already won. Ethan's mouth went dry. I do not want a war. Vivian's gaze held steady. Then do not fight one. Choose what you will accept. Ethan sat because his legs suddenly felt unstable. Vivian remained standing for a moment, as if sitting would make this too personal. Then she pulled out a chair across from him and sat down with measured control. Nora stayed by the door, coffee in hand. Alert but quiet. The storms. Vivian slid the thin lakefront folder across the table. This is the standard author agreement. Advances royalties rights. Ethan stared at it as if it were written in another language. You already have one. Vivian's eyes flicked to the leather folder on the table. For this manuscript, yes. Ethan's throat tightened. I told you I did not want to publish it. I said it was for my daughter. I heard you, Vivian said, and I also heard what you did not say. Ethan's fingers curled around the edge of the table. What I did not say. Vivian did not rush. You did not say you do not want it to exist, she replied. You said you do not want it to be taken from you. Ethan's stomach twisted. He looked away toward the blank wall. The room felt too warm. I do not want Zoe dragged through some spotlight because I got lucky, he said. Vivian's voice stayed quiet. This is not luck. Ethan laughed once a short sound. Tell my bills that. Nora's coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. She did not comment. Vivian's gaze softened slightly. Ethan, she said, using his first name without asking permission. You can refuse. I will not punish you, but you cannot keep punishing yourself. Ethan looked back at her. I am not. Vivian's eyes sharpened. You are. You have been for years. Ethan felt heat rise in his face. He hated that she could see him so clearly. He hated that it felt like relief. He glanced at the lakefront folder again. Graham said you have to step back. Vivian nodded once. I will, officially. Your editor will be Marisol Chen in Children's Acquisitions. She is excellent. She has more patience than I do and less tolerance for nonsense. Ethan blinked. You already assigned someone? Vivian's mouth tightened. I do not waste time. Nora lifted her cup in a tiny toast toward the ceiling, then lowered it again. Ethan stared at the pen. Then why am I here? He asked. Vivian's hand moved toward her coat pocket, hesitated, then withdrew. Because I need you to understand something, she said. I am not doing this to save you. I am doing it because the book is worth making real. Ethan's voice came out low, and because of Lena. The name hung in the air. Vivian did not flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out the framed photo that had been face down in her office. She set it on the table between them, face up. A little girl with a gap-toothed smile stared back at them. Dark curls, bright eyes. She held a cheap plastic flashlight in both hands like it was treasure. Ethan's chest tightened so hard it hurt. He did not touch the frame. Vivian's fingers rested on the edge. She called it lightning, Vivian said. She thought light could be stored in a pocket and used later when you needed it most. Ethan swallowed. The room seemed to go quieter, as if even the air freshener stopped trying. My daughter calls your book Her Brave, Vivian continued, voice steady but thin. That is not nothing. That is a child trusting a story to carry her. Ethan's eyes stung. He stared at Lena's smile and thought of Zoe folding cranes on the kitchen counter, turning fear into paper so she could hold it. Ethan's voice turned rough. Zoe's mother called, he said. Vivian's gaze lifted to him. Yes. Ethan blinked. How do you know? Vivian did not look surprised. Because you started disappearing, she said. Because your edits became shorter. Because you stopped making eye contact in hallways. Nora shifted her weight by the door. Her coffee cup lowered. She listened without pretending not to. Ethan rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. Tessa wants to see Zoe, he said. She said she is stable now. She said she is getting married. She wants to introduce Zoe to a stranger like that makes it okay. Vivian's jaw tightened. And Zoe? She went quiet, Ethan replied. Then she started folding cranes again. She used to do that when she was smaller, when she missed her mom but did not want to say it. Vivian's eyes dropped to Lena's photo. Children fold things when they cannot carry them, she said softly. Ethan exhaled through his nose. I am trying to protect her, he said. Vivian looked up. Protection is good, she said. Isolation is not the same thing. Ethan felt the words hit a place he had kept locked. You think I'm isolating her. I think you are isolating yourself, Vivian replied. And you are calling it protection because it sounds cleaner. Ethan's laugh came out as a breath. Clean, he said. That is your language. Vivian's eyes flicked, not offended, just aware. It was she admitted. It is not working as well lately. Nora's mouth twitched almost a smile. She kept quiet. Ethan stared down at the lakefront folder again. If I sign this, he said, then it becomes a thing people can take. They can review it, criticize it. They can talk about Zoe like she is a character. Vivian nodded. They might, she said. So, we control what we can. We keep Zoe out of publicity. We keep your home private. We set boundaries in writing. That is part of this contract. Ethan looked at her. You would do that? Vivian's gaze held his. Yes. Ethan's throat tightened. Why? Vivian's voice dropped. Because I know what it is to have a child become a topic, she said. I will not let that happen to yours. Ethan sat back, the chair scraping softly. He stared at Lena's photo again. The flashlight in the girl's hands looked cheap and precious at the same time. He thought about the keychain flashlight in his pocket. A small thing, A small light, not enough to change the world, enough to find the next step. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled it out, placing it on the table beside the contract. Nora's eyes flicked to it, then away. Vivian's gaze fixed on the flashlight for a beat too long. Her throat moved. She did not touch it. Ethan's voice came out quiet. "This showed up at my desk the day we started," he said. Vivian's eyes lifted to his face. She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. She simply watched him as if she were waiting to see what he would do with the light he had been given. Ethan picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the first signature line. The ink point trembled slightly. He looked at Vivian. "If I sign, I do not want favors," he said. "I do not want people thinking this is a CEO pet project." Vivian's expression tightened, then eased. "You will not get favors," she said. "You will get work. You will get edits. You will get deadlines. You will hate me at least twice." Ethan huffed a laugh despite himself. Only twice. Vivian's eyes softened, probably more. Nora cleared her throat gently, a reminder of time. "Marisol has a slot tomorrow at 10 for an acquisitions meeting," she said. "If you want to move." Ethan did not look at Nora. His focus stayed on the line. He signed. His name curved across the paper, steady by the second letter. When he finished, he set the pen down like it was heavy. Vivian took the pen and signed beneath his a crisp signature with no hesitation. Then she closed the lakefront folder, placed her palm on top of it for a moment, and let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it since Saturday morning. Nora stepped forward, collected the papers, and slid them into her own folder with brisk efficiency. "Congratulations," Nora said, not smiling too hard, as if joy was also a kind of liability. "Now we make it real." The next weeks moved in tight, focused bursts. Marisol Chen read the manuscript with a kind of ruthless kindness Ethan had never experienced. She praised nothing she did not mean. She cut what did not earn its place. She asked questions that made Ethan sweat. "Why does the kid keep the light?" Marisol asked in their first meeting, tapping the page with her nail. Not the plot reason, the body reason. Ethan's mouth went dry. Vivian sat at the far end of the table, silent hands folded present without taking over. Ethan answered slow, "Because he thinks if he lets it go, he will be in the dark again." Marisol nodded once. "Good. Now write that into his choices." Ethan went home and rewrote scenes at the kitchen table, while Zoe did homework beside him. Sometimes she read paragraphs out loud, stumbling over big words, then correcting herself with a triumphant grin. "This part is boring," Zoe would announce, blunt as always. Ethan would grimace. "Thanks." Zoe would shrug. "Fix it." At Lakefront, Ethan edited other people's books by day and his own by night. The folder traveled with him. The coffee ring-stained page stayed in the back, tucked like an embarrassing secret. One afternoon, the design team asked Ethan for any artifacts from the original draft. They wanted texture. They wanted something that felt handmade. Ethan hesitated, then brought the stained notice page and the coffee ring pages from his earliest printout. The paper edges were worn. The ring was imperfect and real. The designer, a woman with purple glasses, held the page up to the light. "This," she said, "is gorgeous." Ethan blinked. "It is a spill." "It is a story," she corrected and snapped a photo. When the first cover comps came back, Ethan stared at the screen in Vivian's office. A faint coffee ring was worked into the background, like a soft halo half hidden behind the title, as if the light in the book had always been surrounded by ordinary mess. Vivian looked at it for a long moment. "Leave it," she said again, and this time Ethan heard what she meant. Zoe began folding paper cranes at night and leaving them in Ethan's laptop bag. Some had lightning bolts drawn on the wings. Some had tiny notes in uneven letters. For Dad. For Vivian. For the book. Ethan found one at his desk on a Tuesday tucked under his keyboard. Nora pretended not to notice him staring at it for too long. Vivian stayed careful at work. She did not hold private editorial sessions anymore. She did not linger in hallways. But when Ethan sent a revised chapter to Marisol, Vivian always received a copy on the official chain, and sometimes Ethan would find one pencil line in the margins of the printed version on his desk the next morning. A single note. A question mark. A small circle around a sentence that deserved to breathe. No signature, just light pressed into paper. By the time the manuscript went to copy editing, the snow outside had thinned into slush. The river looked less like steel and more like water again. On a Friday morning, a box arrived at Ethan's desk with his name on it. Cardboard, tape, the smell of fresh ink trapped inside. His hands went still as he cut the tape with a key from his pocket. Nora watched from her desk, pretending to type. Ethan folded the flaps back. Advance copies lay inside, stacked like bricks. Pocket lightning. The cover was real. The title was embossed. The faint coffee ring glowed behind the letters, subtle and stubborn. Ethan lifted one copy out. It was heavier than a printout, heavier than a folder, heavy with the fact that it existed. He opened to the dedication page. For Zoe, who taught me to find light in ordinary places. His eyes blurred. He shut the book and held it against his chest for a second, breathing through the tightness in his throat. The office noise continued around him, phones ringing, printers humming, someone laughing too loud, and then stopping. Ethan looked up and saw Vivian standing at the end of the aisle between desks. She did not walk closer. She did not take credit. She simply watched him with an expression that was controlled and soft at the same time, like she was looking at a light she had once believed was gone. Ethan held the book up slightly, an unspoken question and an unspoken thank you. Vivian nodded once. Then she turned and walked back toward her office, her steps quiet on the carpet, leaving Ethan with the weight of the book in his hands and the paper cranes tucked around his desk like small folded promises. Vivian turned and walked back toward her office, her steps quiet on the carpet, leaving Ethan with the weight of the book in his hands and the paper cranes tucked around his desk like small folded secrets. He stayed still until the office noise returned to him in full. Someone called his name from 2 desks away. A printer whined. Nora's keyboard clicked like rain. Ethan slid the advance copy into his bag with care, then took out his phone. Zoe answered on the second ring, breathless. "Dad, I got the book," Ethan said. There was a pause, like her brain had to rearrange itself around the fact. Then she screamed sharp and delighted so loud, Ethan pulled the phone away from his ear. "Bring it home," she demanded. "I will," Ethan said, smiling despite the burn behind his eyes. "And bring Vivian," Zoe added as if she were asking for extra ketchup. Ethan's smile faltered. "Vivian is busy." Zoe made a sound that was half sigh, half judgment. Adults are always busy when they are scared. Ethan stared at the cover again, at the faint coffee ring behind the title, at how something messy had turned into design. "I will see you soon," he said. "Okay," Zoe replied, calmer now. "Do not forget." He almost laughed. "I will not." That night, Zoe sat cross-legged on her bed, while Ethan read the book aloud from the first page. She corrected him when he paused too long. She interrupted to point at the illustrations. She asked why the kid in the story hid the light, even though she already knew. When Ethan reached the dedication, Zoe pressed her fingers to the words and stared like she could make them permanent with touch. "I like that you wrote my name," she said. Ethan swallowed. "I wrote you." Zoe looked up. "Did you write Vivian too?" Ethan hesitated. Zoe watched him with the same sharp patience she used on pancakes. "I wrote a story," Ethan said. Zoe nodded as if that was an answer, and also not. She slid off the bed and went to her desk. She took a sheet of paper from her homework stack and started folding, creasing each line hard with her thumbnail. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. In a minute, she held up a paper crane with a lightning bolt drawn on the wings. She handed it to Ethan. "For the book party." Ethan took it carefully. "Thank you." Zoe climbed back under her blanket and tucked her rabbit under her chin. "Tell Vivian I made it," she mumbled, already sinking into sleep. Ethan held the crane in his palm until her breathing slowed. The weeks before the launch moved like fast weather. Meetings, copy edits, cover proofs. Interviews Ethan said no to. Vivian put boundaries in writing firm enough to hold. Zoe's school sent home permission slips for a field trip. Tessa sent a short email asking again for a meeting. Ethan read it, closed it, and did not reply that night. He watched Zoe draw lightning bolts at the kitchen table and waited for the right kind of calm. On the morning of the launch party, Zoe woke before her alarm. She bounced into the kitchen in her party dress and asked if she could wear lip gloss. Ethan said no, then said yes when she looked at him like he was ruining her entire life. In the cab downtown, Zoe pressed her nose to the window and named buildings like she owned them. Ethan held his suit jacket on his lap and tried not to sweat through his shirt. "You look like you were going to throw up," Zoe said. "I am fine," Ethan replied. Zoe's eyes narrowed. "Liar." The rooftop garden above the Chicago River was already bright with people when they arrived. Strings of lights glowed against the early evening sky. The wind off Lake Michigan carried the bite of water and the smell of the river. Waiters moved through clusters with trays of small desserts and champagne flutes that caught light in their rims. A banner with the book cover hung near the stage. The faint coffee ring in the design looked almost like a halo when the lights hit it right. Ethan stared at it for a second longer than he meant to. Zoe grabbed his hand. "Come on," she said, dragging him toward the crowd. People turned smiling, as if they had been waiting for the author to appear. Ethan shook hands. He signed copies. He tried to keep his signature from changing every time. Nora appeared at his elbow like a stage manager. She wore black and moved like she had a map of every conversation happening. You are doing great, she murmured without looking at him. Keep your shoulders down. Smile like you mean it. Do not drink too much. Also, Zoe has already collected 3 desserts. Zoe grinned with frosting on her lip. They are small. Nora leaned down to Zoe. Stay near your dad. If anyone asks you about your personal life, you say you are here for free cake. Zoe nodded solemnly. I can do that. Ethan watched Nora walk away and wondered how she managed to feel calm all the time. Zoe wandered to the children's table near the edge of the terrace where someone had set out crayons and paper. She began drawing lightning bolts and cranes and a small stick figure holding a flashlight. Ethan stayed near the planter of mums, his glass of club soda cold in his hand. He watched people who looked comfortable in this world. Editors, agents, authors who had learned how to stand without fidgeting. Ethan felt like he had borrowed someone else's skin. Then Vivian arrived. There was no announcement. There did not need to be. She stepped onto the terrace in a midnight blue dress that moved with the wind. Her hair was down soft around her shoulders. She wore earrings that caught the string lights when she turned her head. She looked out at the crowd with the same calm she carried into board meetings, but when her gaze found Ethan, something in her face shifted. She crossed the terrace and stopped beside him. Their shoulders were close enough that Ethan felt warmth through fabric. You are hiding, Vivian said. I am observing, Ethan replied. Vivian glanced at his glass, hydrating. Trying to stay vertical, Ethan said. Vivian's mouth lifted at one corner. You are vertical. Ethan watched her the way the wind tugged a strand of hair across her cheek. He wanted to brush it back. He kept both hands on his glass. Zoe ran up and grabbed Vivian's hand without asking permission. Hi, Zoe announced. You look like a movie. Vivian blinked once, then her expression softened. Hello, Zoe. Zoe pointed at the banner. My name is in the book. It is, Vivian replied. Zoe leaned closer to Vivian and lowered her voice in a way that was not quiet at all. Are you going to have pancakes with us now? Ethan's face heated. Zoe. Vivian's eyes flicked to him. Pancakes, she repeated as if tasting the word. Zoe nodded. Yes, Dad makes them. They are good. Sometimes he burns them, but it is on purpose. Ethan cleared his throat. It is not on purpose. Zoe grinned and ran back to her crayon, satisfied. Vivian watched her go. For a second, her hand stayed lifted in the air where Zoe had held it. Then it lowered slowly. Your daughter is fearless, Vivian said. She is 6, Ethan replied. She does not know what she should be afraid of yet. Vivian looked at him. She knows, she said quietly. She just does not let it decide everything. Ethan swallowed. The wind pushed cold under his collar. A flash popped across the terrace. A photographer moved around the crowd, catching moments. Ethan caught the bright burst in his vision and blinked. Vivian's gaze followed the photographer for a second, then returned to Ethan. Do you want to dance? She asked. Ethan laughed under his breath. Here, in front of everyone. Vivian's eyes sharpened with something like challenge. Yes. Ethan glanced around at the publishing crowd. I will look ridiculous. Vivian stepped closer. You already did the ridiculous thing, she said softly. You wrote the book. The subtext in her voice tightened something in Ethan's chest. I do not dance, he said. You do, Vivian replied. You just do it like you are negotiating with gravity. Ethan let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. That is accurate. Vivian held out her hand. Her fingers were steady. Her eyes were not. Ethan took her hand. The band was small, tucked near the stage. A slow song started something with a steady beat that gave people permission to move closer. Ethan and Vivian stepped onto the open space that had become a dance floor, without anyone calling it that. Ethan placed his hand lightly at Vivian's waist. He kept his touch careful. Vivian's hand rested on his shoulder, and the contact felt like a sentence he had been afraid to write. They swayed. The string lights above them blurred slightly when Ethan breathed. Vivian's voice was low. You are tense. I am in a room full of people who can quote my mistakes, Ethan murmured. Vivian's mouth moved. Let them. Ethan glanced at her. That is easy for you? Vivian's eyes held his. No, she said. It is not. They moved in silence for a few beats. Ethan felt the wind lift the edge of Vivian's dress. He smelled faint rain and paper. He felt her steady breathing, controlled, practiced. Ethan's throat tightened. He asked the question that had been sitting under his tongue for months. Why did you come to my door? He said softly. That morning. Vivian's gaze shifted away for a fraction of a second, then returned. You forgot your folder, she replied. Ethan's grip at her waist tightened slightly, then eased. You could have mailed it, he said. You could have sent Nora. You could have waited until Monday. Vivian's jaw flexed once. Her eyes held his bright under the lights. I know, she said. Ethan waited. Vivian inhaled slow. I could not stop thinking about you after the interview. She said each word precise, as if she was trying not to let emotions smear them. Not just your work. Ethan's pulse thudded in his throat. Vivian continued quieter. The way you spoke about stories, the way you did not try to charm me, the way you kept looking at the clock and then tried to hide it because you were worried about your child. Ethan swallowed. That is not charming, he said. Vivian's mouth lifted small. It was honest. Ethan's voice turned rough. So you used the folder as an excuse. Vivian did not deny it. Yes, she said. Ethan stared at her, the wind cold against his cheek, and he whispered. Vivian's gaze dropped to his mouth for a heartbeat, then lifted back to his eyes. And I wanted to see if what I felt was real, she said. Before Ethan could answer, a microphone thumped. Conversation dipped, heads turned toward the stage. Zoe had climbed the steps. Ethan froze. Zoe, he whispered, but his voice drowned in the crowd. Zoe tapped the microphone once, then twice. The sound echoed across the rooftop. She held a copy of Pocket Lightning in both hands like a sermon book. Hi, Zoe said into the mic. I am Zoe. I am the dedication. Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and surprised. Zoe opened the book. She squinted at the page, then began to read, slow and careful, sounding out a longer word, and correcting herself without help. When the power goes out, Zoe read, the brave ones do not wait for the sun. They click on whatever light they have. Ethan's chest tightened. He recognized the revised line. He remembered writing it at the kitchen table with Vivian's pencil note in his mind. Zoe paused and reached into her dress pocket. She pulled out a tiny keychain flashlight. Ethan's breath caught. He had not noticed her taking it from the counter at home. Of course she had. She had always treated light like a thing you carried. Zoe clicked it on. A small bright beam cut through the dusk and pointed up toward the string lights, then down toward the crowd. The flashlight looked ridiculous and perfect at the same time. The audience laughed, charmed. Cameras rose. Another flash popped. Zoe lowered the flashlight and looked straight at Ethan and Vivian. Her face turned serious in a way that made Ethan's stomach drop. Also, Zoe said into the microphone, my dad and Ms. Sterling are very bad at telling the truth out loud. The crowd erupted. People laughed louder. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. Ethan felt heat flood his face. He turned to Vivian, expecting the chill of embarrassment. Vivian was laughing. Not the polite laugh she used in meetings. A real one, bright and unguarded, the sound of it surprising even her. Her eyes were wet at the corners, not from tears from the wind, from something else. Vivian looked at Ethan, still smiling, still breathing a little faster. Is your 6-year-old accurate? She asked, voice low. Ethan's heart pounded. He glanced at Zoe on the stage triumphant flashlight beam, still trembling slightly in her small hand. Then he looked back at Vivian. I do not know, Ethan said, honest enough to hurt. But I think she might be. Vivian's smile softened. The laughter in the crowd faded into a hum as people watched, curious and delighted, waiting like readers at the end of a chapter. Vivian's hand lifted and touched Ethan's cheek just once. Her fingers were warm despite the wind. I am scared, Vivian said, simple. Bear Sweesterman, people stumble. Ethan swallowed. Me too, he admitted. Vivian's eyes held his. Then we tell the truth, she said. Ethan nodded. The noise around them dimmed as if the rooftop had narrowed to one circle of light. He stepped closer. Vivian rose onto her toes, slightly closing the last inch. Ethan met her halfway. Their kiss was quiet. No performance, no announcement, just the simple press of lips in cold air, the kind of warmth that did not ask permission. A camera flash went off, someone cheered, someone laughed again. Ethan did not look away. When they separated, Vivian's forehead rested lightly against his for a second. Her breathing was unsteady. Ethan's hands were steady now, as if the part of him that had been shaking had finally found its place. On the stage, Zoe clicked the flashlight off, satisfied. She stepped away from the microphone, hugging the book to her chest, as if she had just completed a very important job. Zoe stepped away from the microphone, hugging the book to her chest, as if she had just completed a very important job. Ethan and Vivian stayed where they were, close enough that the cold air could not quite fit between them. The rooftop around them filled back in sound and movement, returning like a tide. Someone clapped hard near the bar. A waiter laughed while trying not to spill a tray of flutes. The photographer angled for another shot, then lowered his camera as if he had already gotten what he came for. Vivian's hand remained on Ethan's cheek for a beat longer than necessary. Her fingers were steady now. Ethan's breath came out slow, like he was letting go of something he had been holding since the day he found the red letter in his mailbox. Zoe hopped down the stage steps and ran straight at them, dress swishing, eyes bright. Well, Zoe said, planting herself between them, like a referee that was not so hard. Ethan's face warmed again. It was hard, he said. Zoe squinted. You did it anyway. Vivian looked down at Zoe. The corners of her mouth lifted small and real. You have strong opinions, Vivian said. Zoe nodded, yes. Nora appeared at Ethan's side like she had been waiting in the shadows of the mums. She looked at Vivian, then at Ethan, then at Zoe's triumphant posture, and shook her head once. I have scheduled the rest of the evening, Nora murmured to Vivian, voice dry. Please do not set anything else on fire. Vivian's eyes flicked to Nora. Noted. Basoom. Nora's gaze moved to Ethan softer for a fraction of a second. You still have to sign copies, she said. Fame is inconvenient. Ethan huffed a laugh. I am aware. Zoe tugged Ethan's sleeve. Can I sign one too? Ethan looked down. You want to sign my book? Zoe nodded. I am the dedication. I think I should. Vivian glanced at Ethan. She has a point, Vivian said. Ethan handed Zoe a pen. Zoe bent over a copy and wrote her name in uneven letters, then drew a lightning bolt so dramatic it almost took over the page. She held it up proud. Vivian watched her with a look that seemed to hurt and heal at the same time. Later, when the crowd thinned and the wind sharpened, Ethan found Zoe near the children's table asleep with her head on her arms. Crayon marks streaked her fingers. A paper crane sat beside her, folded from the corner of a napkin, tiny and stubborn. Ethan lifted her carefully, feeling the weight of her trust against his chest. Vivian stood close as they walked toward the elevator bank. She kept her hand on Zoe's back for a moment, as if to reassure herself she was real. In the lobby, Vivian touched Ethan's arm lightly. I can drive you, she said. Ethan looked at her. The words were simple. The offer was not. I have a car, he said. Vivian nodded once. I know. Outside, snow dusted the sidewalks in a thin, glittering layer. The streetlights made it look clean. Ethan's breath fogged. Zoe stirred once and mumbled something about cupcakes. Vivian walked them to Ethan's car anyway. She waited while he buckled Zoe into her booster seat, then she stood at the passenger side door, hands in her coat pockets, hair moving in the wind. Ethan closed the back door and turned. Thank you, he said, voice rough. Vivian held his gaze. For what? For coming, Ethan says. Said. For staying. Vivian's eyes softened. For telling the truth, she replied, and her voice was quiet enough that it felt like it belonged to just the two of them. Ethan nodded. He stepped closer, not touching yet, giving her space to choose. Vivian closed the gap herself. Her hand slipped into his coat pocket and found the keychain flashlight fingertips brushing plastic. You still carry it, she said. Ethan exhaled. You started it. Vivian's mouth lifted slightly. You kept it. She leaned in and kissed him again, brief and warm, then pulled back as if the cold reminded her where they were. Drive safe, Vivian said. Ethan nodded. You too. She took one step away, then paused. Her hand rose hesitant and touched Zoe's sleeping hair through the cracked window just once. Then she turned and walked toward her car. Ethan watched her go until her taillights blended into the night. A year passed in a series of small moments that did not make headlines. There was a coffee-stained kitchen counter in Oak Park that slowly stopped being the center of Ethan's fear. There was a stack of paper cranes on a shelf that grew one by one, folded during spelling practice, folded during hard phone calls, folded during long waits in school pickup lines. There was one meeting with Tessa in a quiet diner near the train station public, and bright with Ethan seated beside Zoe and a paper crane in Zoe's pocket like a talisman. Tessa looked thinner than Ethan remembered. Her smile arrived late, as if it had to travel through guilt before it could reach her face. Zoe stared at her for a long time, then asked if she liked pancakes. Ethan's jaw tightened, but Tessa laughed, startled, and said yes. They started with that. There were nights when Vivian sat at Ethan's table, coat off, sleeves rolled, reading Zoe's homework with the same focus she gave contracts. Vivian did not pretend it was easy. She simply showed up again the next day. The wedding was small, not in a cathedral, not on a rooftop. In a community garden in Evanston where the lake wind reached them anyway because Chicago always insisted on being part of the story. Zoe wore a dress that made her spin every 10 minutes. Nora stood near the aisle with tissues and a clipboard expression, stern as if she could keep the weather in line by sheer will. Marisol brought a gift wrapped in paper printed with tiny lightning bolts. Ethan's hands shook when he held the ring. Vivian's eyes were bright when she said yes, voice steady, like she was choosing something and refusing to flinch. Zoe walked Vivian down the aisle with a seriousness that made people laugh softly. Halfway up, Zoe stopped and turned to the crowd. She is not an ice queen anymore, Zoe announced. Vivian's mouth twitched. Ethan covered his face for a second, then lowered his hand and met Vivian's gaze. Vivian's eyes held a warmth Ethan still could not quite get used to. After the wedding, Zoe began calling Vivian Mom in the way children do without ceremony, as if the word had been waiting nearby, and Zoe finally decided to pick it up. Vivian did not correct her. The first time it happened, Vivian's breath caught. She blinked hard once. Then she said, "Yes, sweetheart," like she had been practicing the response in secret. Their new house sat in Evanston, a compromise that did not feel like a sacrifice. It had a small porch and a swing that creaked under 2 adults and 1 child who liked to climb. It had a kitchen that filled with the smell of butter and coffee and paper. On a winter evening, the kind where the windows turned black early and the street outside looked like a quiet tunnel, Ethan stood in the doorway of Zoe's bedroom. Vivian sat on the edge of Zoe's bed with a hardcover book open in her hands. Zoe lay under the blankets, rabbit tucked against her chin, eyes half shut. A paper crane hung from the lamp chain, swaying slightly in the warm air. The book Vivian was reading was not Pocket Lightning. It was a new story, one Ethan and Vivian had written together, pages marked and rewritten until the sentences felt like they could carry weight without breaking. Vivian's voice moved through the last paragraph, low and steady. Ethan watched the way Zoe's face softened at certain lines, the way Vivian's fingers held the book like it mattered. Vivian closed the book gently. The cover made a soft thump against her palm. Zoe's eyes opened wider for a moment. "Do they live happily ever after?" she asked, already sleepy. Vivian's mouth lifted, small and tender. "They live honestly ever after," she said. Zoe frowned, thinking hard even with sleep pulling at her. "That sounds harder." "It is," Vivian replied. Zoe considered that, then nodded once. "Okay," she said, as if she had accepted a very serious contract. "But they still have pancakes sometimes." Ethan let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Vivian glanced toward the doorway and met Ethan's eyes. The look carried a question and an answer at the same time. Zoe yawned. "Mom," she mumbled the words, slurring at the edges. "Tell Dad to stop working late." Ethan's chest tightened. Vivian's gaze shifted back to Zoe. "I will," Vivian said. Zoe's eyes closed again. Her breathing slowed, even and soft. Vivian stood carefully, like she did not want to shake the room. She set the book on Zoe's nightstand beside a stack of cranes. Each crane had something written on it in tiny pencil. Dates, single words, sometimes just a lightning bolt. Ethan stepped back as Vivian came into the hall. She closed Zoe's door almost all the way, leaving a sliver of light. In the living room, the porch swing creaked under them. The lake wind was quieter here than in the city, but it still found its way around corners. Stars pricked the dark above the rooftops. The street lamps made the snow look pale blue. Ethan reached for Vivian's hand. She laced her fingers through his without hesitation. For a while, they sat in silence that felt earned. Ethan finally spoke, voice low. "Do you ever think about that folder?" he asked. Vivian's thumb brushed the side of his hand. "The one you forgot," she said. "The one I left," Ethan replied. Vivian's mouth lifted. "It is still in the kitchen," she said. Ethan looked through the window, at the counter inside. The leather folder sat near the edge, worn now, the clasp softened from use. Beside it lay the keychain flashlight, and next to that a paper crane with a lightning bolt on its wing. Under a magnet on the fridge, a copy of the first final notice still lived. The coffee ring dried into the paper like a stubborn signature. Ethan had kept it not because he wanted the fear, but because it reminded him what had been true. "I used to think forgetting it was the worst thing I did," Ethan said. Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder. "I know," she replied. Ethan listened to the swing creak, to the distant hush of a car on wet pavement. He felt Vivian's steady breathing. He felt the quiet weight of being here. Vivian's voice came softly. "Sometimes a thing gets left behind because it refuses to be hidden anymore," she said. Ethan turned his head slightly. "You are poetic now," he murmured. Vivian huffed a small laugh. "You have been a terrible influence." Ethan squeezed her hand, guilty. Vivian shifted and slid her fingers into his coat pocket. She found the keychain flashlight he still carried, out of habit, out of comfort. She pressed the button once. A small beam of light spilled onto the porch floor, bright and ordinary. It caught a patch of snow and made it sparkle. It did not change the night. It made the next step visible. Vivian clicked it off and tucked it back into his pocket. Then she looked up at the sky, and Ethan followed her gaze. Inside, the house was warm. Zoe slept with her rabbit. The book on her nightstand lay closed, ready to be opened again tomorrow. On the porch swing, Ethan held Vivian's hand and let the quiet stay. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.